"Ma'am, step back. You're not authorized to approach the display." The voice was crisp, too young, laced with an impatience that pricked at Eleanor Vance like a splinter. Her left hand, the one with the persistent tremor, paused inches from the gleaming glass case. Inside, bathed in a soft, reverent light, sat General Silas Thorne's service pistol, his campaign ribbons, a framed commendation. Her fingers, gnarled from years of phantom pain in the limb that wasn't there, clenched around the small, tarnished dog tag hidden in her palm. I just need to place this," she murmured, her voice raspy, a sound that seemed to catch and dissipate in the sterile, echoing air of the hospital lobby. A young, sharply dressed aide, all polished brass and pressed polyester, stepped closer, a condescending smile playing on his lips. His name tag read L.T. Davies. "Look, I appreciate your enthusiasm, ma'am, but this is a private dedication for a new wing. And frankly, that little trinket isn't part of the official narrative. We have a very precise order of artifacts." He gestured with a dismissive sweep of his hand, a movement that felt like a physical shove, a condescending dismissal of her presence. The hum of the crowd, the muted applause from the main auditorium where dignitaries were already assembling, all seemed to mock her silence. Eleanor's gaze didn't waver from the display, but her jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath her weathered skin. She could feel the stares, the whispers, the quick, pitying glances that slid off her like oil. Just an old woman, confused, out of place. The thought, sharp and familiar, pierced her. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. But today it felt different. Today it was a wound. Eleanor Vance had seen battlefields where the air tasted of dust and fear, where the very ground vibrated with the roar of heavy ordnance. She'd commanded platoons, then companies, rising through the ranks of the Marine Corps to become a sergeant major, a force of quiet, unyielding will. But that was decades ago, a lifetime carved out of grit and blood and the unshakable belief that some promises were etched not in stone, but in the very fiber of your being. The uniform she wore now, a faded set of woodland camouflage utilities, pressed meticulously but bearing the marks of countless washes, felt like a second skin. It was the only uniform she had left, the one she'd worn on that last fateful mission. It wasn't the dress blues expected at such a high-profile event, but it was hers. And on her right sleeve, where a unit patch would normally sit, was a stark, empty space, a testament to the classified nature of her final, defining service. She stood just outside the velvet rope, a sentinel in a world that had moved on without her. The gleaming floors of the General Silas Thorne Veterans Hospital's new wing reflected the overhead lights like a polished mirror. Everything was new, pristine, almost painfully bright. The air conditioning hummed, a stark contrast to the stifling desert heat of her memories. Generals in crisply starched dress blues milled about, their chests heavy with medals, their smiles practiced for the cameras. Politicians, their faces smooth and unlined by anything but ambition, shook hands with the ease of seasoned performers. Eleanor felt like a ghost, a relic from an era they had chosen to forget, or perhaps never truly understood. The dog tag in her hand was cold, its edges worn smooth by years of friction against her skin. It wasn't hers. It belonged to Silas. Not the General Silas Thorne, the towering legend whose image graced the banners fluttering from the hospital's facade, but Silas, the gruff, unyielding, fiercely loyal Marine she'd served under in the deepest, darkest corners of the world. He'd given it to her himself, after the mission, after the dust had settled and the silence had become deafening. "Keep it, Vance," he'd rasped, his voice raw from smoke and exhaustion. "For when they try to tell you it never happened. For when they try to make you forget." He'd clutched her good hand, his grip surprisingly gentle. "And if I ever make it home, and you're still around, you bring this to my grave, or my monument, wherever they put me. You bring it, and you tell 'em the truth." Eleanor had kept that promise. 35 years. Through the long, agonizing recovery from the IED blast that had claimed her arm and left her with a constant, buzzing static in her head. Through the quiet, anonymous years that followed, as the classified mission faded into whispers and then into official silence. Through the nightmares, the tremors, the frustrating inability to string words together when her mind raced too fast. She'd carried the dog tag, a physical anchor to a past that was both a burden and a sacred trust. Now here she was. The hospital, this new wing, was Silas's monument. And she was being told her offering, her truth, was not part of the official narrative. Lieutenant Davies, sensing her stillness, mistook it for compliance. He turned, a self-satisfied smirk on his face, ready to usher her away. If you'd like to wait in the public viewing area, ma'am, there will be a live stream of the ceremony. Eleanor didn't move. Her gaze, though, shifted, not to Davies, but to a woman across the lobby, standing near the podium, speaking quietly with a cluster of high-ranking officers. General Anya Thorne, Silas's daughter. She was formidable, a mirror image of her father's stern resolve, but with a polished, almost ethereal grace. Her uniform was impeccable, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Eleanor had only seen her from afar, in news clips and official photos. Anya Thorne was a rising star, groomed for greatness, far removed from the dusty, blood-soaked battlefields where her father and Eleanor had forged their bond. A young private, barely out of basic training, walked past, his eyes glued to his phone. He bumped into Eleanor, sending a jolt up her prosthetic arm. "Watch it, old-timer," he muttered, not even looking up. The metallic click of her prosthetic against the polished floor as she steadied herself seemed to echo in the cavernous space. Old-timer. The words stung, not because of their ageist bite, but because they implied irrelevance. She was not just an old-timer. She was a witness, a keeper of secrets, a silent monument to a sacrifice they had all chosen to forget. She thought of Silas's last words to her, not the public ones, but the ones whispered in the dark, amidst the chaos of a collapsing tunnel. "Vance," he choked, blood bubbling on his lips, "don't let him bury the truth with me. See this through. For both of us." He'd pressed the dog tag into her hand, his fingers cold, already losing their grip. She had promised. A silent nod. A vow made in the face of death. The ceremony was beginning. A band struck up a patriotic tune, its notes swelling through the lobby. The crowd began to filter into the main auditorium. Lieutenant Davies returned, his patience visibly thinner. "Ma'am, I really must insist. You're creating a disturbance." He reached out not to touch her, but to block her path, his hand hovering near her shoulder. Eleanor felt a familiar wave of panic, the kind that tightened her chest and made her vision swim. It was the TBI, the lingering echo of the blast. The words she needed, the explanation, were trapped behind a wall of static. She could only stare, her eyes pleading, her hands still clutched around the dog tag. Just then, a voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the din. "Lieutenant Davies, is there a problem here?" General Anya Thorne. She had moved closer, her gaze sweeping over the scene, her expression unreadable. Davies snapped to attention. "No, ma'am, General Thorne. Just a guest attempting to access a restricted area. I was just escorting her to the public viewing." He tried to sound calm, professional, but a hint of nervousness colored his tone. Anya Thorne's eyes, the same piercing blue as her father's, fixed on Eleanor. They held no pity, no condescension, only a keen, almost clinical assessment. Eleanor met her gaze, holding it, refusing to look away. She could feel the tremor in her hand intensifying, the dog tag digging into her palm. Anya took a step closer, then another, until she was standing just on the other side of the velvet rope. She looked at Eleanor's faded uniform, then at the empty space on her sleeve. "Sergeant Major," she said, her voice surprisingly soft, though it carried the weight of rank. "My father spoke of a Sergeant Major Vance. Said she was the only one who truly understood him. Said she was the only one who never left him behind." Eleanor's breath hitched. The words, so unexpected, felt like a sudden, cleansing rain. She wanted to speak, to confirm, to explain, but her throat was tight. She simply held out her left hand, slowly uncurling her fingers, revealing the tarnished dog tag. Anya's eyes widened just a fraction. She reached out, her gloved fingers gently taking the dog tag. She turned it over, her thumb tracing the faded, hand-etched numbers on the back. A small, almost imperceptible gasp escaped her lips. "The sparrow tag," she whispered, more to herself than to Eleanor. "He told me about this, said it was a promise." She looked up, her eyes now shimmering with a raw, unspoken emotion. "He said if anyone ever came with this, it meant they were the one who saw him, truly saw him." Lieutenant Davies stood frozen, his face a mask of dawning horror. The whispers in the crowd had died down. A few people, sensing the shift, began to gather closer, their cameras held aloft, now pointing at Eleanor. Anya Thorne turned to Davies, her voice now a whip crack. "Lieutenant, this trinket, as you called it, is the very heart of this dedication. My father's final directive specified that this dog tag, and only this dog tag, be placed in the display, and that it be placed by the person he entrusted it to." She held up the tag, its dull metal suddenly gleaming with profound significance. "Sergeant Major Vance, you honor us with your presence. The display is open, and it is yours." Eleanor felt a surge of something she hadn't felt in years. Recognition, not just of her rank or her service, but of her soul. She stepped through the velvet rope, the tremor in her hand still present, but now imbued with purpose. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward the glass case. The pistol, the ribbons, the commendation, they were symbols. But the dog tag, that small, unassuming piece of metal, was the truth. She reached the display, her fingers tracing the glass. Anya Thorne stood beside her, not in front, not behind, but shoulder to shoulder. The general nodded, a silent cue. Eleanor opened the small, hinged panel of the display case. With her left hand, slow and steady, she placed the tarnished dog tag next to General Thorne's pistol. It seemed to hum with a quiet energy, a testament to a shared past, a promise kept. The metallic click as the panel closed echoed in the sudden silence of the lobby. Anya Thorne then did something unexpected. She turned to Eleanor, and for the first time, her face softened into a genuine, heartfelt smile. She extended her hand, not in a formal handshake, but a gesture of camaraderie. "Thank you, Eleanor," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "For everything. For him. For us." Eleanor nodded, her throat still tight, but a quiet peace settling over her. She knew then that the truth had found its voice. The dedication ceremony proceeded, but the atmosphere had irrevocably shifted. The earlier dismissive glances were replaced by respectful nods. The young private who had bumped into her now stood at rigid attention, his phone forgotten. Lieutenant Davies, pale and chastened, avoided her gaze entirely. Later, as the crowds thinned and the media packed up their cameras, General Anya Thorne approached Eleanor again, this time alone. "There's one more thing, Sergeant Major," she said, her voice low. She led Eleanor to a quiet corner of the new wing, a small, sunlit atrium filled with lush green plants and comfortable benches. In the center, a simple, elegant bronze plaque was set into a stone fountain. It read, "The Nightingale Atrium dedicated to the unseen, the unsung, the unforgotten. For those who carried the burden in silence, that others might live in light." Eleanor read the inscription, her eyes widening. "Nightingale?" she whispered, the tremor in her hand almost gone. "That was our code name." Anya nodded. "My father insisted. He said the true heroes were never the ones on the podium. They were the ones who sang in the dark, so others wouldn't be alone." She paused, then added, "He also said you were the one who taught him that song." Eleanor felt a single tear trace a path down her weathered cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of profound understanding. This wasn't just about Silas. It was about all of them. The ones whose names would never be on grand monuments, whose missions would remain classified, whose sacrifices were known only to a few. She reached into her uniform pocket, pulling out a small, worn piece of fabric. It was a simple, hand-embroidered patch, a stylized nightingale stitched in uneven thread. She had made it herself years ago, a private symbol of her unit, of their shared ordeal. No one had ever seen it. She knelt slowly, wincing slightly as her prosthetic leg protested, and pressed the patch gently into the soil at the base of the fountain, near the plaque. It was a silent burial, a final act of remembrance, a gesture no one told her to make, but one that said more than any speech ever could. Anya Thorne knelt beside her, a quiet understanding passing between them. "They'll come here," Anya said, her voice soft. Eleanor looked up, her eyes clear. "They already are." She rose, not with a triumphant stride, but with the quiet dignity of a woman who had fulfilled her promise. As she walked toward the exit, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the polished floor, she noticed something. The young private who had bumped into her, the aide who had dismissed her, they were standing near the entrance, not at attention, but simply standing. And as she passed, the private, his face earnest, whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." Eleanor didn't stop, didn't turn. She simply nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible dip of her head. Because some uniforms fade, some names are forgotten by the official record, but some men and women, some stories, some truths never do. They are carried, like a sacred trust, in the quiet spaces of the heart, waiting for the moment to sing.